Welcome, everyone. Greetings. Thank you for joining our trio talk about Threekit's Treble. We will have Aman presenting from the start to talk about the more technical side, and then we have Amanta and Trevor who will be coming in to talk a little bit more about the UI and best practices, things you should and should not do. Definitely feel free to pass along the recording of this as well. It would be on community.threekit.com. And with that, I hand you over to the very capable hands of Mr. Aman.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. So I'm just going to be starting off this talk today with discussing Treble. Sorry, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen and that it's coming in on a good size. It's not too small.
Yep, looks good.
Great,
Looks great.
Thanks. Okay, so before I jump into the agenda of what I'm going to be talking about, I'll just say that if you have any questions along the way, keep them coming in. We really value those. It would be great to discuss them at the end. And even if it's just something that you're not sure about, it might clear up some confusions for other people as well. So the more questions, the better that we get out of this. All right, so I'm just going to jump right in. So the agenda for my section of the talk to do with Treble is just really to give you an introduction of what the tool is, how to use it, and how far you can push it. The idea being that if you have enough familiarity, you can start filling in the gaps for yourself with the documentation. So it's really just about trying to get you self-sufficient with Treble. So I know a lot of you are familiar with it, but we'll do a quick 30 seconds, 1 minute about what Treble is, just as a quick recap. From there, we'll jump right into using Treble. We'll start with bootstrapping a Treble app, seeing how that process works and getting it set up for your specific project needs. From there, we'll talk a bit about developing with Treble, just how to think about what the tooling offered to you is and how you can leverage it to really make your life easier on building a Threekit configurator. And then I want to spend a bit of time talking about managing multiple products, because this has been sort of a new feature. It's a big upgrade in Treble that we're offering. And I think it's something that's going to be very useful on most of our projects. So it would be good to share that with everyone working on these projects as well. All right, so I'm just going to jump right in, starting with what is Treble. So quite simply, Treble is a React framework for building web experiences for your Threekit configurator. Not too much to unpack there, just things I'm going to highlight on is that it is a React-based framework. So under the hood, it is just a create React app approach to building a React app. So you can think of using Treble as just using any other React app, which has a few toolings already offered to you for use with Threekit. The other aspect of Treble, and I think this is also a very valuable point, is that it bootstraps development, but also it manages deployment. And that's a really important part. So I'm going to show you one approach to bootstrapping a project, and I'd really strongly recommend using that approach, just because it really feeds into our deployment pipeline for Treble, which is always something you can request for a project on setup. It's something we'll happily set up for you and hand over. But using this approach feeds very easily into that pipeline, and we can get you set up with deployment very quickly, specifically for your Treble apps for Threekit configurators. So that's just a quick brief about what Treble is. Getting into bootstrapping of a Treble app. So starting a Treble app is very simple. Wherever you are, all you have to do is open up a terminal and run the command npx create Treble app at latest. Just a quick caveat about the at latest tag. That's only there because we're still in active development of the beta for Treble. Chances are this is already stabilized, but just to make sure that you always have access to the latest iteration, I'd highly recommend adding that add latest tag at the end of the initialization script. Okay, so at this point, I'm just gonna jump right, oops, sorry about that. I'm gonna jump right in. Oh, how do I get out of this? Escape, there we go. I'm gonna actually start putting together a Treble app. We'll run this bootstrap process and we'll see how it goes from there. So I'm just gonna switch into my terminal. I'm gonna run, please let me know if this is too small as text. Actually, let me just make it a bit bigger. create Treble app at latest. It's going to prompt me for a name for my Treble app. So I'll just call it Trio Talk Demo. And from there, it's going to start bootstrapping my app for me. This should take about a minute. So without wasting too much time hanging around here, I'm just going to use this as a quick opportunity to jump back into developing with Treble. So we'll demo everything and we'll walk through it. But I think there are a few sort of axiomatic points that I just want to get across, which I think understanding these would be, they're very simple, but understanding these would make your development lifecycle a lot easier and a lot more in sync with what Treble actually has to offer. So the first point here is that to get it set up for your project, you just have to update the credentials in the .env file and the .threekit and the threekit.config.js file. So we'll be doing that in a second. It'll make sense once I actually do it, but just first step should be getting your environment credentials in there. The second point here is the Threekit provider is the essential central component for a Treble project. It's the one thing that should wrap all other hooks and components using Treble as a way to initialize our API and then make it accessible to all these other areas within the app. The third point, hooks provide functionality, components provide UI. That's a good way to think about how to go about implementing a feature, which is in all likelihood, we should be providing hooks that would allow you to functionally do what you need to do. And that the only development required on your side would be to build out the presentational side of that functionality, just an interface for the user to actually interact with any of those underlying features. And then the last thing, and I think this is also a very important point, it's one of those things that makes a huge difference when it comes to embedding your built app into an e-commerce environment or really any page that it has to be embedded into, is to set up your index.html to sort of mirror the structure that you would want this to be outputted as on that page. So if your app has to be split into two different divs, where we have the player in one div, the form in another div, it's a very standard e-commerce 2-column layout. We can do that very easily, but that's something we should try and do from the start of the project so that there's no friction when it comes to actually embedding. I'm going to pause for a quick second. I know I've shared a lot of information, talked a lot. Any questions at this point? I'll take big questions at the end, but if there's anything that's confusing, Michael, Amanda, if you catch something, just let me know as well.
Yeah, we'll do.
All right, thanks. Okay, so given that we've sort of discussed these, I'm going to jump back into our Treble app. So it's fully initialized. I can go into that directory and I'll open it up and we'll have a quick look at what we have there. Oh, this opened up on another monitor, so I'll just bring it in here. Okay, so this is our Treble app. It's what's been initialized. I'm going to do what step one was, which is just copy in the credentials to get it running. So I'd have to populate them in the environment .env file. So for this demo, I'm just going to be using an org that we set up for the Treble demo. It's just some furniture products, some side tables with 2 drawers, 3 drawers, and consoles for, let's say, a TV unit that could go on top of these. So nothing too complex, just wanted to share that for the demo. I'm going to start by copying over the org ID. This goes into my env file under preview, because that's the environment it's coming from. I'm going to switch back over here, and I'll create a token for my local development. I'll just call this Trio Talk. And for my local development, I'll just use localhost. I know previously we would have to specify the port. That's no longer a requirement. So it's a lot more flexible if you just specify localhost. You don't have to be concerned with what port it's running on locally then. So that's a bit of a convenience. All right, token created. I'll copy this over. So it goes in my preview public token. So this looks good. I'll close this out. And the last thing I just need to do is copy over an asset. So let's just pick 3 drawers, something at random. I'll copy over the asset ID, that I want to use to initialize. I'll head over into my Threekit config, and in my products for my preview asset ID, I'll copy this in over here. And if I head back over to my terminal, I can now run yarn start. And I should see that, actually, let's just give it a quick second. This should be running at localhost 3000. And let's just have a look at what kind of a configurator we should expect. We should expect 3 attributes, a finish, a handle finish, and a handle style. So we have a finish, we have a handle finish. Let's pick something that looks a bit different so we can see it. And we have a style. So we have a Treble app bootstrapped. It's working as we wanted. We've added our credentials. Quick touch point on the other points mentioned. So if I look into my app.js secs, I see that I have the Threekit provider I mentioned, and it's wrapping my whole Treble project. So this becomes the central component, the entry point for our app, and it's integral to have this in our single app instance. The other point mentioned was the index.html file. So I'm going to open this side by side. And what you see here is that our Treble app is actually going to be embedded into these 2 divs rather than just one div. The standard for React is just putting everything in a single div. But for this, the assumption is that on my e-commerce page, I would want to put in my Treble app split up between the player in one column, the form in another column. So just from the start, I have my index.html set up to match that format, 2 separate divs, 2 separate columns for that. And in my app, I am mirroring that structure, whereby I'm sending the whole app to Treble root, and the form specifically, I'm porting over to the separate component. Any questions with this setup so far?
Where is mapping the main trickle treble route, where you're saying that you're sending the form and the other one is sending to the treble route?
Okay, good question. So for the default React app, the div that we're embedding in comes from what's called in the React DOM render. So this is actually in index.js. So let me trying to get a bit too much out of my screen here. So in my index.js, I'm sending my entire build app into TK Treble root. So that's over here in my index.html. And then if I head over to my app, I have access to a component called portal to element. And what portal to element will do is it will send all of the contents within it, all of its children, to the div with the ID I specify. So I'm saying that everything inside of this component wrapper should be ported to a div with the ID TK Treble form. And as you can see over here, we have TK Treble form, and I'm essentially just pushing in the Treble form into there.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I was working with this in another project before. So, but I want to, that is a simple thing. I was trying to put the form in the left side of the screen, and then the Treekit player in the right. So I have to change. Yeah, I have to do that thing in the index. But I just want to confirm that if there is another way to do this more easy, just change it.
So
the place.
Right. No, I think that's a great question. So there will be changes that needed to be made here. There's obviously going to be some easy approaches to it, but I think the right approach here would be for this to match whatever is going to happen on the e-commerce side, because that's a bit more rigid. We have a lot less flexibility about what we can do in a pre-existing page. And then on our side, when we're actually building the app out, we kind of have to figure out a way how we can fit our app nicely into that structure. So if we know we have 2 columns on the e-commerce page, to switch what's going where in terms of player left or player right, I would say that update should just happen in the index.js, depending on how I order these. But any other changes of what is populating what, I think that comes into the Treble context of what I can split this into 3 if need be, and I can send a submission button, an add to cart button to a whole other div on the page. So that flexibility we have over here, we should just make sure that this structure matches the limitations of what the e-commerce page provides us.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna pause. There might be some more questions. Just please add them to the list or just hold them to the end, because I'm just gonna move on here a bit. We're running a bit short. Okay, so where we're at, we have our app showing up. We have components showing up. Now, in all likelihood, these components won't be useful for our project. Our clients will have very specific needs of what they want their components to look like. And a lot of that will be dictated by the page we're going into. They'll want to make sure there are no styling conflicts. Everything looks appropriate to their branding. So one of the most important principles here is that you should try and leverage custom components as much as possible to ensure that you have that flexibility to build these components the way you want. And I'm just going to quickly walk you through how to approach that. So by default, when you load up the app, we have the flat form coming in from our library, from Threekit tool/Treble. What you'll notice is that you also have a folder of components, and these components will mirror and actually be a bigger list of offering from what we offer internally. So what I can do is over here, I can replace my flat form with, I'm just going to import, let's say, tiles as an example. Components, tiles, oops. I'll put the tiles in here and I'll pass an attribute called finish. I believe it was capitalized. And I think there was finish, handle, style. And if I head back over, so I have these, sorry, just refreshed. I have these new components show up. They still work just as they would otherwise. But the neat thing about these is now, if I head back over to my code, I have access to all the HTML, CSS that I would need to modify these components to exactly how I want them to work. So we give you this treasure chest of components. Everything works straight out of the box. They're fully styled, they're fully ready to go. But you can also use that just as a starting point to make any kind of modifications on the styling needed for your project. All of the CSS here is being implemented through Tailwind. It's a great styling library. I think it's one of those ones that's getting a lot of traction. But again, you're not bound to any specific styling library. You can import material, you can import line and design, you can install styled components, you can do any kind of SAS, pre-processing, post-processing for CSS. Whatever you want to install, you can install on top of this and just update the styling of these components for what you need. Just quickly coming back to the point in the slide, really, so then this should become your development paradigm. So the approach to development should be, you use our native hooks, the ones that we provide through our library, you build or extend the custom components that you need, and then you just assemble those custom components into a form for your configurator. And that's sort of very quickly what we've done. Without actually modifying or extending the components, what we've essentially done is we've used these custom components that are built on our hooks to put together our own form. And then we have that displaying on the front end.
Sorry, when you import that, you doesn't have to import that title component, for example. Yeah, you did it, sorry.
Yeah, and I can replace this immediately with tiles group, right? Or any other component. If I make a new one, I can, I would have that immediately accessible. So let me escape out of this. And if I head back over to my Treble app, they've
Aman, there's one question in the chat too when you're able to get to it. If you're in a rush, no worries.
Sure. I have about 3 minutes to go. I know I'm eating into Amanda and Trevor's time. I just wanted to check if that's okay.
That is no problem at all. Take your time.
Okay. Okay, I'll be quick. Let's see what the question is. What about TypeScript? Okay, great question. So we have TypeScript support out of the box. The only thing that would change is that, sorry, let me just quick. I'm not going to demo this, but I'll just share this with you over here. So it's in the recording. The only thing that you would have to change is adding a TypeScript flag to when you're initializing the app. So for example, over here, I would run npx create Treble app at latest -- TypeScript. So if I run this instead of the regular one, it's going to instantiate a new Treble app, but using TypeScript for the default language settings. So it'll include a tsconfig, it'll allow for JSX, but it'll also allow for TypeScript. Great question. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so last part of this is managing multiple products. Okay, the only slide here the only thing to really mention or showcase for that is the approach for multiple products. So I know so far I've said that the Threekit provider is a central component, and that is true. And it's especially true for these single product app like we built. I'm going to show you an approach for building the same app for multiple products. That is going to actually leverage two separate components. It's going to leverage a product layout and a Treble app component, not the Threekit provider. So the Threekit provider will actually be applied by the Treble app internally. So if you're using multiple products, these are the components you're going to use, as opposed to the Threekit provider. I know this is a bit confusing. I know it's contradictory to what I said before, but it'll make sense. And I think most of our projects have to do with single products in a lot of ways. So it's important to know that the Threekit provider is essential. It's just in this approach, it's used implicitly. Okay, so very quickly, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show that we also have a products folder in here. I have one file that comes in here. It's just a template file, and it looks very similar to what we had in our app.js by start. It has the same flat form, the same player, most of it's the same. The main difference you'll note is that instead of the Threekit provider, we have this other component called a product layout. And what a product layout allows me to do is it allows me to define this UI layout, so this React product component, and specify it to be relevant to a specific product. So I'll change this to product one as a showcase of what that means. Yeah, so let's say I've defined this as my product. This is the UI I want to use for my product. I'm going to pass it a definition of those products, which is to say a unique ID and any kind of initialization specific to that product. Okay, so I'll walk you through this and it'll start to make sense as we implement it. So what I'll do is I'll implement two products and we can look at the difference. So I'll call this one side table, and this one can be console. Let's change this to side table. Let's get the ID for it. And switch back over here. Grab our console. And just to make sure that we can see some kind of a difference, I guess what I'll do is over here, I'll just say this, actually, I need to put this in a div. Okay, so what I've done here is I've created two unique product layouts. They're quite similar, but they can be unique. This is just one small difference. They can be as different as you want them to be. I have assigned each of them a name. This one's called console. This one's called side table. And I've provided in the initialization parameters for that. We've already provided in the credentials, that is to say the public token and the org ID. All we have to do is provide in the asset specific credentials. So I've created these two products. They live in my product folder. I'm going to head over to my index.js file. And instead of importing my app, I'm going to import my Treble app component straight from my library. And I'm going to instantiate that. I'll hit save. I'll head back over to my browser. And oops, it's refreshing. Okay, so now you can see that I have the console showing up. What I can do in my Treble app is I can pass it a product ID. And whatever product ID I pass, it'll render the UI for that product. Did I put a dash in between side table? So if I hit save and I head back over to my browser, this should refresh with the side table. Did I spell it wrong? Nope, looks right. Cannot read undefined if preview. Let's try it without the dash. Strange. I was testing this right before this call and this was working. Let's just try the console one. But the idea is that you just pass in the ID for what you want to render and it should render it. So the way that you would use this in production, sorry, I just want to see if this is loading. Okay, so the console's working. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the way you would want to use this in production is that the assumption is that each of these products would have their own PDP page. So our app, we would want to embed a single app in each of those PDP pages, but we just want to make sure that it initializes with the product that's relevant for that page. And the way we can implement something like that very easily is that if every PDP page carries on its window object what product it is, let's call this Threekit product ID, then we can embed our same app and have it dynamic to render out any product that we need, depending on whichever product PDP page it sits in. I know the product switching was a bit buggy. I'm going to try and quickly fix it and maybe showcase it at the end of this call. But as a workflow, this works. It's something we have running in projects. But yeah, it allows you to use the same Treble app to build out multiple product layouts for multiple products and have them be within the same app. So that was the last part of Treble I just wanted to share. Any questions about this or really anything else at this point?
Oh, maybe we can try to do put it the asset ID or something.
Here we no that I just saw the issue. It was the name was wrong. So the naming convention is a bit important. It has to end with .product.gsx. So I think that should fix it. Sorry, was your question something different?
No, I just saying that maybe you can try to do that, put in the asset ID or something like that.
Oh, instead, let's see if this works then. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it was just the file was named incorrectly. So depending on whatever product ID I have available on the window object or however you want to pass this in, this can be through a query param. Basically, you just pass it in through the environment and it'll render out the product that you need. Okay, any further questions? Any confusions about anything? I can see that there are some in.
There's one in the chat. Is there a way we can connect this component to any products API out there?
Not inherently. That's something, sorry, not natively rather. That's something we're still working on. It's just that the chances are that where that product data lives is such a varied set, and the way we would interact with that information is so varied that it's been hard to provide a solution that's easy for implementers, but robust enough for it to be useful. So we're still figuring that out. We're coming close, but we're not there yet. Another question, sorry, I just saw, I think that's a really good one. Copy in, okay, so somebody actually caught my arrow, so that's great. Anything else?
Sorry, my interruptions. But
No.
yeah, I would like to know if I know that we was looking at the component folder into the React, but I don't see it anything to manage, for example, the dropdowns. So I was trying to work with dropdowns before in another project, but it gave me a lot of troubles using that.
Right. Okay. So going forward, I would recommend not trying to modify any of the native components. So you should modify these because you can actually modify the code. But part of the reason we're switching to this approach is it was very hard and very inflexible to modify the components that we offered by default. So we're going with this build your own, bring your own components approach. The dropdown is something I'm going to be adding very soon, along with a slider and a number input. So hopefully once that's done, whenever you boot up Treble, those will be included in the custom components. But another thing that I think where this becomes valuable as a way to approach these implementations is that it's very easy for developers or development teams to sort of maintain their own list of components as well. If you put together something for a project that's interesting, that you think is reusable, it's always good to just maintain a repository of those components and copy paste them into a fresh project when you start. If you use them, they'll get bundled in. If you don't use them, they'll get ignored. So it's not even a hit on performance or optimization.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Are there docs available? Yes, great question. So the docs are available on our community.threekit.com. Ooh, sorry, that's the wrong place. There we go. So the easiest way to do it is just search for Treble, and you have all the docs over here. Specifically, the one I'm just going to point out is the tutorial, sorry, is the managing multiple products. I spoke about this in detail. I know there's going to be confusions about it, but all the information is here. Everything's laid out. And so is information about the individual components, the product layout, and the Treble app. So all the stuff I showed was here. We also mentioned that you will not need a Threekit provider, all of that stuff. All right, if that's it for me, I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but I'm going to hand it off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Aman. I believe it is time for Amanta to share her slide deck now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Aman. That was very informative. Even I followed along, which is not my strong suit, so that was awesome. We're just going to switch gears a little bit. So we're going to focus on this half more on the design side of things. So Aman talked a lot about technical things. So I think it's worthwhile to discuss the front end and the user experience and the user interface that you guys and everyone works so hard to make sure looks the best. So this portion is just going to be talking about best practices, UI and UX for e-commerce, really making sure that you capture customers' attention and all that kind of more lighthearted stuff, I would say. So I always like to begin with defining the difference between user experience and user interface. So UX really has to deal with the entirety of the experience that a user has when they are trying to buy something on a site. This is from start to finish, and it goes a little deeper than just the visuals that they would see. It has to deal with how quick a page loads, what the SEO is like. So if they're searching something by themselves, how it comes up, and even sometimes it encompasses a customer experience. So that's a little different as well, but it really ties in. I know the pandemic has kind of blurred the lines between the digital space and things that are tangible and physical to buy. So customer experience really ties into user experience now, whereas the UI is just the front end of everything. So making sure that navigations look right, are intuitive, that everything is user friendly. So any different person can come on, enjoy an experience. And both of these work hand in hand to create loyalty and gets people back to a site to buy more and more. So just to start off, I like to talk about the useful tools that are used for the best experiences for web. First of all, obviously the Treble Dev Kit is a really great tool to be able to use. But taking a step back for design, there's also an entire planning phase that happens. So I've just highlighted some design tools here that I think is useful for everyone of all walks of life and experiences to be able to kind of have a little bit of knowledge on and use to create ideas, to expand on them, to collaborate with people. And all of that together works out to have a really great web experience. So Figma, XD, Sketch, Balsamic, which is a wireframing tool, all of these are super easy to get a handle on. And like I said, really great during the planning phase and just letting creativity out. There's a lot of fun that can be had doing this kind of stuff. So these are all great tools to be able to do that. There's also sharing tools, so Miro and Zeppelin, where people can brainstorm. They can also get more technical information like hex codes and that kind of stuff. And then lastly, your peers. We work really collectively, and just having two heads are always better than one, and allowing creativity to flow works out for the best experience possible. Is there any questions? Cool. So I'm just going to talk about some best practices for UI and UX for a web experience. These are super high level. I'm not getting into the nitty gritty, but stuff to keep in mind, things that I notice really create a good experience for me and from customers that I've talked to, and just being a general UX designer. So to start, the entire workflow of a website is super important. We do work on individual product pages, but when our product page is super configurable, sometimes it can be a jarring experience if it doesn't flow with the rest of the website that a client might have. So I just highlighted 3 things that I always like to keep in mind when I'm looking at a website as a customer. So have a well-organized experience, always allowing for a save for later, and then being as transparent as possible. I've just included a website example here that I visit often to show off what an entire workflow that I think is really great. So Sephora here just has a lot of different categorizations that you can flow through super easily. It's a really intuitive UI. Lots of different ways that you can browse, a lot of different ways that you can hone in and select one certain item. Yeah, none of these products are really configurable, but it all works together really well for an overall great experience. So diving in a little deeper to an actual product page, I've also highlighted some key things to keep in mind. So always having a wizard for a configurable product, I think, is really, really important, especially when there is more than, let's say, 2 or 3 steps. So as an example, at the top, we have TaylorMade has 5 different steps for the configuration of their product. And as a user who is coming in and, let's say, has 5 minutes to go through all of this to place an order before her break is up, I would want to be able to see how many steps I have to do in that 5 minutes. So it's all about time management. If I see that there's 5 and I'm an indecisive person, I'm going to save for later and come back. But if I'm not sure and all I have is a next button, chances are I'm going to get frustrated, leave, say that I'm going to come back, and never actually come back and find something else. So they have a really great example, and you can also navigate through the wizard as well. At the bottom, you can see that there is a next and a back. So Another thing that I always like to see on web experiences is to have 2 different workflows to check out. So configurable products, chances are, as a user, I'm coming in for that one specific thing because I want to make it my own. I want to customize it, and I just want to buy it and wait for it to come. So having an add to cart is pretty standard, but having a buy now button I'm seeing is happening more and more, and I think is a really great way to allow users to just purchase that and get on with their day instead of having to go through the full checkout process, have the button that says review cart. There's more steps than necessary if I'm just configuring one product for myself and calling it a day. Thirdly is a clear call to actions. This is the UI stuff specific. So this includes fonts, labels, icons, all of this stuff to make sure that the visual experience is as best as possible. So having clear labels here, TaylorMade has a great example on the screen here. Everything is super clear. I understand what I need to do. I understand that those drop downs are gonna expand and collapse. My back button, my next button is clear. I have a very clear button. So this is a really great visual experience for me. And if a 65-year-old grandma is gonna come do the shopping experience to buy these golf clubs for her son for graduation, that is the best experience for her, as well as for me as someone who shops online constantly. And then the last is the visualization for options like color. The example here is really great. It's a part of the dev kit in the components. Everything is super clear, very large, so I can read it on any type of screen. So I just created a quick example here. This is just an Etsy page that I got. And I think Etsy is a great e-commerce site for small businesses. There's a lot of things that I wish I could change if I ever got the chance to. So I just wanted to highlight the difference of making a few UI adjustments, the impact that could be. So this example is for a mug. There is different selections that a user can make, different little customizations. They have all the information needed for a user to be able to make an informed decision and buy something. However, it's a little convoluted. I'm not exactly sure what I can choose and what I can't. The labeling is a little small. The reviews are a little too big. There's just a lot going on here that kind of hinder the experience overall. So I just created a quick wireframe on things that I would change. So I would make the product name a little easier to understand in all of the additional searches at the bottom. So I don't have to filter through and try to understand what exactly I looked up to receive this mug for my boss. I also moved the save for later at the top so that a user can save it, add it to their wish list, then continue to do searching if they're buying a gift, and then they can compare and contrast a lot easier than having it all the way at the bottom and under a small text. The description I made all of the selections for the customization of the mug into buttons rather than drop downs. Usually you wouldn't want to have a drop down for just 2 options. If they can be buttons, it makes it a lot simpler for the user to go through. I've also added images for the mug design. In the dropdown, it was a little confusing to understand what a one-sided design versus a two-sided design looked like. So having that visualization is really important. And then I moved the actual amount that this product would be at the bottom because it does vary depending on what you select. And if it's at the top, I'm not going to do these actions in a linear fashion and understand why my $20 mug suddenly changed to a $30 mug. So I just moved it at the bottom. I added clear labels for the buy now, and I just added a little bit of contrast to the page so not everything is so white and tiring on the eyes. I'm just going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. I'm just going to speed through. So next is mobile design. I just threw up a little bit of a fact here. So 79% of Americans with a smartphone made a purchase in the last 6 months on that phone. So it's really important to always keep mobile design in mind when a design is happening for a web experience. So just highlighting 3 key things that I like to think about. So having a design that easily transitions from desktop to mobile. So the dev kit has a lot of great components that are customizable, and they stack really well together. So just keeping that in mind when it's being customized for a front end experience, and then understanding that there is going to be difference of movement and states when a user is using a mouse versus when they're using their hand. So if I'm on my configurator, the way that I zoom on a mouse is going to be a little different from the way that I zoom on a hand. So whatever that may be, to compensate for the fact that that is different, we have information, little tooltips that you can put up and that kind of stuff. So just having that being understood when a design is being made. So focused UI, larger buttons are going to be needed for reducing fat thumbing, which happens all the time to all of us. And then having even clearer call to action buttons. That means the text might need to alter a little bit to help the user understand that this is a button. Adding more padding, that sort of stuff is really important when things are switching from a desktop to a mobile. And then finally is having a gallery to reduce scrolling. So a carousel I really like when it comes to larger images, because I can still focus on the image without having to scroll through 7 different pictures to get to my product information and how much the purchase is. So I just wanted to go over one example that I really like. So this is for flowers. It's not loading, sorry. Maybe this one will. Okay. So this is for flowers. And I really like this experience because I think that everything stacks really well. My mouse is not working, sorry. Ah, I'm not sure why, okay. Well, you're gonna have to trust me on this one. It was a good experience. Okay, that's great. Everything stacks really well is what I wanted to say. And I think that it's a really great example on understanding what the actual best experience is for having a mobile design. Sorry about that. My internet's slow, I guess. So just to quickly end it off, I like to talk about some trends that I think are really fun and interesting to look at. Okay. Is my sharing resume? Sorry, I don't know what, can you see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Huh.
It may be that you're having some of the lag there. I may have
Okay.
missed it, but I think you might have a question as well while you're waiting there, which was, do customers get scared away if a configurator looks too different from the main site?
I think Trevor could probably answer that question, but my first instinct is to say a lot of the times they don't realize it. It's not the best experience, so when they do, it is really scary. But it's something that needs to be kept in mind that I think everyone tends to forget. Trevor, I'm not sure. I think you have experiences before. If you want to just share your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily scare them away, but it's in general, it's a good practice to be consistent in terms like the color and the looks and feel of the overall website. But it's not like you scare away if, for example, you use a different color or kind of scheme for like a individual room configurator page. So yeah.
I hope that answers your question. Okay, sorry, yeah, my computer is lagging all of a sudden, so it says I'm not sharing, but I am. Yeah, so I just want to end off with trends that I think are happening in 2022 with UX and UI. that I think are really neat, and hopefully you can incorporate in design one day. Okay, come on, there you go. So first is vertical aligned menus. So I'm not sure if anyone's purchased an Apple product recently, but they do have a vertically aligned menu. I'm not going to attempt to click on the link just in case it messes up again, so I do apologize about that.
Sorry,
yeah.
Amanda, we're still seeing Venus at floor. I don't know if that's what you're sharing.
No, it's not. Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you. I'm going to try again. I don't know what happened. I apologize about that. Okay.
All right. While that's coming up, you do have another question. Are there any specific fonts or sizes that are recommended for buttons on a mobile interface?
Yeah, so so for the size of the button, generally it's about 48 pixels width, and then about 36 pixels for height. So it's a pretty good size. The size 18 font is generally a great size, 16 to 18, depending on what people really want. There's not a huge difference, but those are clear enough for users to be able to see. Semi-bold is also a really great weight to a font because it's not too overwhelming on the eye, so it doesn't look striking, but it's large enough for people to be able to see at any kind of visual level, if that makes sense. Yeah, and the nice thing is that size also translates well to desktop. So mostly the thing to avoid is having buttons that are just text, if that makes sense. So I see it a lot when it comes to having back buttons or forward buttons that it's just a text with an icon, and that's the stuff that you really want to avoid because there's no padding, there's no shape to it, so it can easily be clicked over. It can end up just looking like text, especially if it's on a mobile side of things. So as long as we avoid having links that look like that or text buttons, I think that we're off to like a really great start in terms of like the rest of the web space. Can you see my screen now that says 2022 UX UI design trends?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I have no idea what happened there. But anyways, yeah, so I just wanted to highlight some trends. So a vertically aligned menu. So I just have a screenshot here. So basically what it is the large image, or like the focal point image, stays static, and then everything else kind of moves along with your scroll. So it's a really great way to highlight the image. So if you have a configurable product, you always have your images there, and then as a user scrolls, they don't lose any of that space. They just are able to kind of focus on the side. So let me attempt to click this Apple menu. So I do apologize again. Yeah, so this is a vertically aligned scroll. So I have this iPhone image here and everything else moves with me. And then once I'm done, I can see the rest of my product information, or I can just click continue. So I think that's really fun and super trendy now. And I think it makes for a great experience because I don't have a lot of empty space that I'm looking at afterwards, depending on the type of product it is. So next is Pastel Colours. I touched previously on how a lot of white space or a lot of white for a web page can be tiring for the eyes. That's why we really have seen this shift in dark mode recently, because it's not as bad, but having pastels is a great alternative to doing that without having my eyes be tired after 5 minutes. So I've just highlighted 2 examples here. So the accent colors for these lights are all pastel, as well as the actual configuration part that you see here. I think it's a really great example of using pastels in a subtle way to have a big impact. And then the next image is a little more in your face, but I think the pastels work really well. They are a little bit stronger, but they're still done in a way that they all collectively work together. Next is neutral background. So it kind of plays along the same thing of not having a boring white background that is tiring, especially if you have a larger configuration that has multiple steps to it. So I just highlighted 2 examples here. The first one, all of these colors are muted, so they are a little more neutral. So it's really great to kind of be able to have that experience without getting tired, as well as this jewelry background is technically a neutral background because it has grays mixed into it. It's really light gray is the actual base color, which is the marble effect is lighter gray, excuse me. And it's just a lot more interesting of experience to look at, as well as because it is neutral, you can see that all the text is still visible, so you don't lose any experience there. And that is the end of the UX and UI presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I tried to speed through that, so I do apologize if I spoke a little quickly because we only do have 3 minutes.
I do not see any additional questions.
Perfect.
Thank you, Amanta. Thank you, everyone. Amon.
Thank
I
you so much.
am going to share my screen really quick to give everybody the lowdown on our next 2 trio talks. Community.threekit.com is where you will register for these. You will also be hearing about them from your various contacts here at Threekit. In April, we will be having Andre, Ben, and Kelvin present to us about some of our new bling features, fall off glass, iridescence, bloom. There's some other things they may end up discussing. They want to look at the time on that to make sure they don't run too long. And in May, we will have some of our development team, Sandro and David, as well as someone to be determined, talking about the Threekit APIs and giving some tips and tricks, things that you may not know there. Definitely join us for those. Again, registration is required, so make sure you go to our community site in order to do that. Thank you very much, everyone. Are there any final questions for our presenters today? Seeing no questions, I will thank you for your attendance and wish you all a wonderful week ahead.